Hey, Star Wars fans and Rule the Galaxy fans. Thanks so much for being with us. It's Joe in the pilot seat as usual. And we are actually celebrating chapter 158 of the Star Wars Rule the Galaxy podcast. And we've got a special guest today. We'll get to him in 1 second. We're really excited about that. But as always, you can follow us at Rule the Galaxy SW on Twitter and Instagram. Rule the Galaxy podcast on TikTok, just Rule the Galaxy on Facebook and YouTube. You can get cool gear with the Rule the Galaxy logo on it at Rule the Galaxy, all one word, on Etsy. So go to Etsy.com, type in Rule the Galaxy, all one word. Get your shirt, your hat, whatever. Tell us what you need from us. We'll get it made. And last but not least, you can always email us at ruletheGalaxySW@gmail.com. You know what? It's great to see our fans sending us emails and checking in with us. And we've got a ton of them checking in with us on Twitter as well. But to get past all that, even though I've screwed up to start the show, we're really excited because we have our guest, Mr. Chris Kempshall. Hopefully that's correct, Chris.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
okay, and he is the author of The History and Politics of Star Wars, Death Stars and Democracy. And gosh, it was great. Chris reached out to us when we were doing some interviews with, I think, John Jackson Miller or Drew Karpyshyn and other authors in the Star Wars universe, and mentioned that he was writing a book. And with our busy schedules, this is the first we got a chance to meet up. So Chris, thank you so much for being a part of the show. Thanks for coming on. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on. I've been really looking forward to it. Yeah, it's good. I mean, you're sat over in America at the moment, and I'm sat over here in England, and we're in the midst of a heat wave. So, if I just spontaneously burst into flames at some point during this, consider I'm doing, I don't know, like an Anakin tribute act and just move on to the next segment or
Hey,
something.
well, we'll just call that the Mustafar segment of the show. There we go. So I'm gonna hop in and read some of your bio here. Just some great stuff here. I mean, there's things actually I don't even know if I'm qualified to be having you on our show with all the great stuff in your bio. You're actually a doctor, Dr. Chris Kempshall, historian of Allied relations in the First World War, and as well as popular representations of history and warfare in modern media, particularly in the Star Wars franchise. Goodness, you're a fellow at the University of Exeter and a senior research fellow at the Center for Army Leadership, Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. That is a lot to say, my friend. Um, and I love that you're very deep into the First World War. My daughter graduated with a degree in history and a teaching degree, and she was actually a high school history teacher for a few years. You've got a lot of stuff going on here, and to then go write this book. And it looks like you just also wrote another Star Wars book, Star Wars Battles That Changed the Galaxy, with Jason Fry, Cole Horton, and Amy Ratcliffe, correct?
Yeah, that came about as a weird outcome of me writing the history and politics book. It got tweeted out on like by the British Library of all people on Twitter a few years back, and DK contacted me and said, "Do you want to come and help us write an official Star Wars book?" And it turned out I really did want that.
I think most of us would.
Yeah.
Actually, I probably wouldn't because my writing skills are way down there on my list. I don't even know if my speaking skills are that high, but I do it all the time. Looking at this First World War thing, it really stuck out to me. And this is a question before we even get into Star Wars. And just, throwing a curveball at you. Have you seen the movie 1917?
I have seen the film 1917. I mean, I enjoyed it. I went to the cinema and watched it. But what I
Mhm.
came out of it thinking was that was the best First World War computer game I've ever sat through. Because it's all of the kind of the plot points and the building and the tension. It's like playing a first-person shooter. And now he's got to cross this kind of this canal, and he's got to climb over this bridge. There'll be a sniper in the tower because it's a first-person shooter game. There's always a sniper in the tower, and I super enjoyed it. I really, really liked 1917. I liked the attempt to make it all one shot.
Yes.
Because I've got my original background was in media studies, so I was kind of playing spot the cut at points. If like a piece of wall moves across the front of the camera or something like that, well, there's going to be a cut in there because I can't keep going forever. But it was good. I really enjoyed 1917. It was a fun, interesting film.
That's good. I'm an amateur historian. Like I said, my daughter's very much more into it than I am, but I really like to jump into that area and read a lot and watch a lot of historical documentaries. So when I watched that, I thought I really enjoyed it. And I wonder how true to life some of that really was. But I figured while you're here, I just thought I would ask you if you enjoyed it and you thought it kind of held up. So
Yeah, the opening kind of 10-15 minutes where they're going through the trenches and then they're going across no man's land is a really good depiction of how hectic First World War trenches were. There were loads of people in them. It was confusing. It was crowded. The stuff across no man's land was a pretty good representation of what no man's land would have looked like in the First World War. So yeah, I've definitely seen far worse First World War films for historical accuracy than that.
well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, good. I didn't mean to throw that on you there and go in that
No, it's
different direction.
always happy to talk about the First World War.
Yeah, well, good. There we go. See, we will broaden our listeners' minds by talking about that. So, I'm actually my first trip to Europe is coming up in about 45 days. I won't be heading
Cool.
to England. I won't be heading to France or Germany or any of that. I'm actually going to Italy only. I'll be in Rome, Florence, and Positano. So probably not jumping into too much World War One era things right there, but really excited to go to that, and it'll be my first trip to Europe. So very
Oh, have
excited.
an amazing time. Rome is a great city to visit. It's a huge amount of fun.
Well, I've told my wife we're gonna hit Rome. We're gonna wear her out there. Then we're gonna head to Florence, relax a little bit, and then finish up at the beach and just relax until we come back home. So
That's the way to do it. Rome is not a relaxing city.
no. And I didn't want to finish there, not to take our
No.
listeners down another path. I didn't want to finish there and be so tired and get on that plane and head home. I wanted to be relaxing as we headed back to the States. So
Yeah, do it
hopefully I'm
like
doing
that.
this the right way. So anyway, so we've gone down a couple different paths there, and I apologize. So Chris, what are the best ways for people to find you? Whether it's websites, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram or any other things like that. What are the best places for people to find you to learn more about your background, your history, and then what you're doing with Star Wars?
So one of the benefits of, by the looks of it, being the only Chris Kempshall who has ever existed is that all of my social media is imaginatively at Chris Kempshall. So it's at Chris Kempshall on Twitter, it's at Chris Kempshall on Instagram. My website is chriskempshall.com. It's all adds together to kind of be a nice kind of easily branded whole. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty active on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's where you'll generally find out bits and pieces of what I'm up to. And if you like, I don't know, kind of weird stuff about the First World War or Simpsons gifs or random jokes about Star Wars, you'll find plenty of those on my Twitter account, in amongst other stuff.
That is awesome. Well, good. Well, I'll make sure that we tag all those again on our page, and then also with us on social media there. But let's we'll I'll tell you what, we'll do a little bit of this. We'll hop into the book, but then we'll kind of do segments where we ask questions about other things Star Wars related. So, the book is and I always hate that I don't want to mess up the name here. And I just had it right there. You know the name of the book. Go ahead. What is the actual title of this book?
The actual title of the book is The History and Politics of Star Wars, Death Stars and Democracy.
Death Stars and
Democracy.
Democracy.
Nice and catchy.
Oh, you could have made it a little shorter, right?
I could have made it a little shorter.
No, but it's good, and it encapsulates a lot of things there. I mean, if you think about, all the things in Star Wars that people say, let's be political in Star Wars, let's not be political in Star Wars. There's a lot to chew on in those topics right there. So this book will be coming out soon, correct?
It officially published on the 11th of August. So it lives in the world. I mean, I say officially published. People have been sending me pictures on Twitter being like, I've got your book for like a week. So I think that's like an administrative date. So it exists, it breathes in the world, which is very exciting.
Gotcha. So you were kind enough to make sure I got a chance to read it. Like I said, I've finished about half of it, so I've really enjoyed it. Lots of good points, lots of good historical data to go in there as well. Let's just talk about it. I mean, you've broken it down in some great segments. The intro a long time ago. I thought that was a great way to start it. The first segment of the book, for a safe and secure society, which I thought, looking at what we've looked at in Star Wars. I think that's a great section right there. Section 2, How Liberty Dies. Section 3, Built on Hope. Section 4, Keepers of the Peace, but not soldiers. And let's see, Section 5, We Don't Want Them Here. Is that right? We don't want.
Yes.
Yep. We don't want them here. And then the conclusion, always in motion, the future is. So I'm going to let you lead the way on this, because I said I haven't finished all of it yet. But looking at this, what were some of the things that made you, obviously your background in history was a big part of this, but what were some of the things that made you want to write a book like this? And what were some of the key things that you thought could establish a book like this in this topic?
I mean, the starting point for anything writing about Star Wars is I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I'd had this whole weird thing had happened. I'd done some stuff about First World War computer games, and it had done quite well, academically speaking. And the editor at Routledge had seen it and was like, we should talk about other ideas. I was like, are we talking like First World War ideas? Are we talking random geeky ideas? Because I've got some random geeky ideas I'd really like to do. And kind of pitched this book to him, and he really liked it, and it evolved from there. But I didn't want this just to be a kind of either. I didn't want to be that guy at a dinner party, which is like, I know a lot about Star Wars. You are now a captive audience to hear me talk about Star Wars.
I think that's most of our podcast at most events. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, which is great when you're talking to other Star Wars people, but
right.
if you want to talk to like other civilians, they're going to walk off, and I didn't, I didn't want that to happen. So I wanted this to be adding something both to kind of history and also to Star Wars fans. And my starting point with it was, and I've been saying this at various places, this isn't a criticism of books that analyze Star Wars that have already existed, because I can completely understand exactly the thought process behind it.
Sure.
But generally, for a lot of academic studies, when they look at Star Wars, they begin and end with the films. Because it's super easy to watch the films. You don't have to go and bankrupt yourself buying a ton of books or computer games or comics or anything like that. You sit, you watch film, done. But my starting point with it was to simply just look at the films is to miss, a huge amount of stuff that's 100%. Super important, that the fans are really invested in and are interacting with history and politics and various events in exactly the same way or kind of in different ways that the films are, but they're not approaching it from a completely different standpoint. They're trying to utilize real world stuff in exactly the same way that George Lucas was with A New Hope. So I wanted to write something that took it all. The books, the old expanded universe legends stuff, the current canon, the computer games, the comics, as much as I could, random tabletop games, TV shows and the like, because I wanted to show that all of it counts and it all feeds into each other. The line between what goes into a film and what appears in a book is so heavily blurred that stuff goes backwards and forwards from it. George Lucas can say, and repeatedly did, that I'm not influenced by what happens in the books, but he still named Coruscant. Yep. He still used Dathomir and the like. That turnstile isn't as fixed as George Lucas might want us to think it was. And the overarching kind of mission objective with the book was to go, okay, so we take the films, we take the books, we take the TV shows, we take everything, and then we try and answer the question, when Star Wars speaks to us, what is it trying to say?
Sure.
What are the messages that it's trying to put across, whether or not it comes on the film or on the page? And I think the only way you can answer that is by gathering up as much of the material as you possibly can and saying, if it's got a Star Wars badge on it, it counts. And collectively, we begin to see patterns emerge, and we begin to see, distinct moments and distinct eras within publishing, within the films, that speak to very specific real world things, whether or not it's happening, 1,000 years ago with the fall of Rome, or 5 years ago with the fall of the Soviet Union, or now with the War on Terror. All of it is drawing on stuff. And when you put it all together, it's actually quite a convincing collection of material. And sure. it speaks about really interesting stuff.
Well, one, I agree with you on all that. I think the thing that I've learned and seen from reading books, watching movies, watching TV, things like that, is so much of what we see whether it's subliminal or meant to be right there in our face, is the perspective of the writer. It's the
Yes.
perspective of what they see, what they think. And then it's not so much of a, you will think the same way I think. It's, here's my thoughts,
Yeah.
take them as you will. And I read into, in the first half of your book, I read so much into it to where I thought there are certain things where I definitely see where this is coming from, but at the same time, I can see them in a different way. Not
Yeah.
not to say that they're, cut in stone by these authors or by the directors, but I can see where they're going, and I can go, okay, they're correlating it to this, but in
Yes.
my life and when I grew up, this is what I'm correlating it to.
Yeah.
But I really like where you're going with this. Couple quick questions. One, um, Mark Newbold. Do you know Mark Newbold? Have you met Mark Newbold? And the only reason I'm
I
asking
don't
is
think I
because,
have met him.
like every American, I think everybody in England knows each other. And Mark's in England, and I will tell you what, if there's a nicer person, I haven't met him. Well, maybe Steve Glosson and Scott Reif and Adam Bray, but that's another story for another time. Mark Newbold he's in England. He works for StarWars.com, Star Wars Insider.
Oh,
He's
cool.
run the podcast stage the last few times at Celebration. But what I'd like to do is, if you haven't met him, if you don't know him, obviously Star Wars Celebration Europe, was coming up next year in England.
Yeah,
I'd love
very
to get you
excited.
two together because I think you two would have a grand conversation. So don't mind me. I'm going to connect you offline with him because Mark's just a great guy, and he runs Fantha Tracks, the podcast.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you should definitely get yourself on there because they have a great following and they do a great job. So that was my first question. My second question was, about how long do you think, because this took a lot of research, how
Yeah.
long did it take you to write this book?
So I signed the contract for it in May 2017.
Wow.
And obviously we are now 5 years later, and it's not May 2017 anymore. Now, some of it took a reasonable amount of time, and as I made clear to my publishers at various points, this is not my fault that this book is late. But if you think about where we were in May 2017, the sequel trilogy hasn't finished yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we couldn't release a book before that had finished, because if we had no idea how it was going to end. If it had come out and massively contradicted everything that I'd said in the book, then they're just they're going to pulp it, and I'm not emotionally secure enough to watch somebody pulp my book. So obviously we were kind of waiting around for Lucasfilm to finish releasing the sequel trilogy, and Rise of Skywalker got delayed like 2 or 3 times and pushed back at various points. And then, there was the pandemic happened and various archives closed, which means I couldn't get in and look at various books I wanted to. But actually, it all kind of came together quite nicely because, as an offshoot of that, because of the delay and then me going to the British Library, that's how I got contacted by DK in like 2019 or 2020 for it. But a lot of basically the entirety of the Expanded Universe Legends stuff I already owned and had previously read. So I didn't have to kind of go back and go, right, we'll begin with Heir to the Empire,
Mm-hmm.
and then start going through all of the books in kind of chronological order. And so most of the research for that was already done and existed in my head. And as a result, was the easiest research project of my life, because I was like, I need to double check on something. Well, yes, I'll just go upstairs then, and pull it off of a bookshelf rather than having to get on a train to London or something. So that was super easy and kind of useful. But most of the actual writing for the book didn't happen until last year. I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about it and planning out in my head, and obviously all of the new Disney stuff was brand new. I had to I watched the finale of Rebels and read the Chuck Wendig's Aftermath books and Alexander Freed's Alphabet Squadron books and all those kind of bits and pieces. Eventually I had to draw a line, and I had to draw a line before my publisher drew a line, I think, because you could go on forever. So yeah, most of the writing took place last year, but it's been a kind of an ongoing thing in the background for about 5 years. So having it out in the world now is I mean, I'm very tired. But
Yeah.
it's just great.
Well, again, I screwed up on the publishing date. For everyone who's listening right now, the history and politics of Star Wars, Death Stars and Democracy, it's out now. Yes, I was lucky enough because Chris sent me a copy so I could study. I didn't get all my studying done, but if you're listening, you need to go buy this book if you just want to compare real world and Star Wars and how it kind of intertwines. So I'll tell you what, before we go to the next question on the book, we always ask these kind of questions for people. So what brought you into Star Wars?
So Star Wars had kind of been I imagine with a lot of people, it'd been like a thing it existed in my life. So like the original trilogy were on the TV over here in England, and we, taped them on VHS, and, I'd watch them to death. Although we didn't have The Empire Strikes Back, and I find that really weird. But I was also saying to somebody the other day, I have no memory of not knowing that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father. I got cheated of my Empire Strikes Back moment, and I'm so annoyed about it. It's so frustrating. I'd love to erase that knowledge from my brain and go back and watch it again. But I played like some Star Wars computer games and the like, but I think the kind of the crystallizing moment for me was that I went on holiday to Florida when I was maybe about, I don't know, 13, 14 years old. And in downtown Disney there, they used to have a big Virgin Megastore. And I went in there and I saw on the shelf this book called Star Wars Spectre of the Past by Timothy Zahn. And I went, I like books, I like Star Wars, I'll buy it and I'll read it, and just, ate it up in like 15 minutes because it was great. And that was it. Then I was getting all of the expanded universe stuff. I was buying I bought a computer game which over in America I think was called Rebellion, but over here it's called Supremacy, which is a real-time strategy game, which I continue to love with my whole heart. And I just kind of descended deeper and deeper and deeper into Star Wars. And yeah, so since about kind of 13, 14 years old was the moment when I kind of had my full Star Wars expanded universe moment.
No worries. That's a great story. I also, I grew up with the original trilogy, so I was lucky. I was blessed to have that. But obviously, the Thrawn trilogy brought me back to Star Wars in such a huge way. And I was lucky enough that earlier this year, I was at an event. We were doing our podcast at an event called the ICC Con in Nashville, Tennessee. And sitting right there was Timothy Zahn signing books.
Oh, that's really cool.
And I didn't bring any of my books with me. So I went, bought a Timothy Zahn book and walked up to him and said, Mr. Zahn, here's my story, blah, blah, blah. He signed it right there for me, took pictures with me. It was like starstruck, right? Because, here's a guy who's just meant so much to the Star Wars community. A quick story, and everybody, all of our listeners have heard it, but I actually wrote a handwritten letter to Timothy Zahn after Heir to the Empire. So in 1991, and he actually wrote a handwritten letter back to me.
That's pretty cool.
And then my dad, while we were moving, threw it away.
Oh, cheers, Dad.
Love my dad. I understand he doesn't like Star Wars. That's okay. But to be able to go and meet him, take a picture with him, and have him sign a book, it made up for it. So
that's super cool. I kind of hope he's coming to, because I imagine we all are, quite a lot of us going to Celebration in England next year, which is pretty convenient. He wasn't at LA, which was my first Star Wars Celebration. But I kind of hope that he'll come to the London one, because I'd be super tempted to get him to sign my copy of Battles That Changed the Galaxy, in that sense of, I read your book and then X amount of years later I got to write an official Star Wars book.
I guarantee he would do that. He's a great guy.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I kind of hope that would happen.
So we'll bounce back to the book. Your first segment of the book, for a safe and secure society, about totalitarianism. Gosh, that's hard to say. Imperialism and the Emperor. Give us like a 30,000 foot view of what your thoughts were on this chapter or segment of the book.
So I think this is not only the most important chapter in the book, I think it's the most important aspect of Star Wars. That if you're talking about like Star Wars is real world, historical and political, and stuff that they borrow from our world, the Galactic Empire is the most important part of Star Wars, because it's the part that is the most stable, but also the most flexible. The Galactic Empire evolves to be whatever Star Wars needs it to be in any particular time period. So, it can be America in Vietnam. It can be the Soviet Union in the kind of the 1980s. It can be the post-Soviet Union in the 1990s. It can be America during the War on Terror. It can be the Nazis. It can be the British Empire. It can be anything that the writers want it to be. And because everybody understands what the Empire is, you know, the rules about the Empire don't really change. You know, they're bad guys, they have Star Destroyers, the Emperor's not a great human being, but he shoots lightning from his hands, so that's kind of cool. You know, all of these aspects of it, that the Empire, to kind of use a metaphor, is like the sun that everything else around Star Wars orbits. And therefore is the most interesting and the most important aspect. And what I think is quite new, that I've done in the book, is through the expanded universe, looked at that 1990s period and up until kind of the early 2000s, when all you're really getting is the expanded universe books. And then you obviously get the prequel books, the prequel films towards the end of the 90s. But the way that the Galactic Empire mirrors up with kind of ongoing cultural ponderings in America about, well, the Soviet Union's gone, so I guess we won then, but also we've got this post-Soviet Russia, and we're worried, you know, there might be like an ultra-nationalist group in Russia with like a nuclear weapon, and that would be, you know, that would be scary. And you go, well, America says that, and then you get a film like Air Force One with Harrison Ford, which is exactly about that. And then you get a book like the Jedi Academy trilogy, which is entirely about that. You know, this super ideologue Admiral Daala, and she's got a super weapon as well. And these things just repeat themselves over and over again. And I just think it's fascinating the way that the Empire continues to exist and breathe in these historical spaces.
You know, a couple things from that, because I got to dig deep into that chapter. One, I like all the things you kind of coincided with it. I think, you know, obviously for Americans, this is going to sound, please don't take this the wrong way, but for Americans, a lot of the times you think of Great Britain as the empire before the American Revolution. You sit there and you go, oh my gosh, they had colonies, they had their hand in everything. It was their way. You were their subject, but you had no rule, right? I mean, so that's one extra layer that I looked at. I was like, you know, even looking further back, that was something that stood out. But then living in America today and being old enough to know what it was like to go through, I missed Vietnam. I was born during the Vietnam era, but seeing the time frame of the first Persian Gulf War and then seeing the war on terror start, something that kicked into my head was, you know, I lean one way or the other in politics, so we don't have to get into that, but I will say the government in general, by doing that safer but secure government, to where we're going to give you all this safety, but we're going to take this away from you. And so that really stuck out to me, in that, you know, those things, not only the things you brought up, but those two things stood out to me on that first chapter there as well. So, but you're right, sticks very much to regular world stuff right there. So
there's a really interesting book again about kind of history in Star Wars that your listeners might like, called The Empire Triumphant by Kevin Watmore Jr. It's a really, really good book. I like it a lot. And his examination of the Empire was, again, largely focused around the films, but he made a really interesting argument, which was, how imperial is the Galactic Empire in the films? You know, if we think about your example of the British Empire, has lots of colonies, has lots of space, but does the Empire have any of that? Do we know? You know, we're told obviously the Empire is bad, but what makes the Empire imperial? You know, in its sense, other than just a big bad government. And what you end up seeing, again, through parts of the expanded universe, but weirdly, or not say weirdly, super interestingly now in the Disney elements, is exactly how imperial and colonial the Empire is. They're constantly looking over at the next door neighbors and going, we really like your stuff. So it might be our stuff now. And you see it, you know, you see it in Solo, you see it in Rebels, you see it in a variety of material. And that is a super interesting element.
I think you brought it up, that during the time of the prequels, when you went into Tatooine, there's no Imperial presence. No. But by the time you get to the original trilogy, the Empire's got a presence at Tatooine. So
you know, do they just happen to be there because the you know, they're hunting for Luke Skywalker? But if we now include Kenobi in it, it doesn't appear that the Empire is in control of Tatooine at that point. But by A New Hope, well, maybe they are, and everyone seems
Right.
to be partying in the streets at the end of Return of the Jedi. So maybe Tatooine has been absorbed as a colony of the
Yep.
Empire, which is a really kind of interesting timescale on it.
Nope. I like it. We'll hop back off the book real quick. Do you have a favorite movie or show of the Star Wars universe?
So I'm going to be greedy with the movies because basically I have a favorite of each trilogy, and I
That's
find
all
it
right.
very hard to split them up. So, you know, I imagine, like a lot of people, I really like The Empire Strikes Back. I find it super interesting and super compelling, and for any number of reasons, but I like the fact that it does a film backwards. You know, the big battle scene is at the beginning rather than, you know, you're not building towards like a big land battle on Hoth or anything like that. So I love those aspects. And again, for getting a little bit of an inside look into the Empire, I really like Revenge of the Sith, from the prequel trilogy. You know, it's not an uplifting film, but you know, it's a fun, interesting film, and it gives us something that, you know, everybody had been waiting for 20 or 30 odd years for, to see the fall of the Republic. And I really like The Last Jedi. I thoroughly enjoyed The Last Jedi. I know it's not for everybody, but you know, there's an element of every part. You know, there's always parts of Star Wars that aren't for everybody. It's, you know, everybody doesn't have to like the same things. But I really liked The Last Jedi. I came out of the cinema and I saw it at midnight over here, and I just spent days thinking about it, like a long time thinking about that film, and leaving the cinema thinking. Because if you take into account the prequels, we all know where the prequels were going. It wasn't going to be like a shock when Darth Vader, you know, lost limbs and got into the big suit. Leaving after The Last Jedi going, I genuinely don't know what Star Wars is going to be next, and
Yeah.
I found that super cool. So all three of those films were really good, and I really enjoyed them. I like Rebels a lot.
Oh yeah.
I like I always find it interesting when kind of people start watching the Star Wars TV shows, because they actually all follow a very similar formula. Of the first season is generally quite compacted, you know, a couple of the characters. It's often an element of, you know, adventure of the week stuff, so you bed in and get to know everybody, and then you start moving further and further out into the wider galactic picture, by the end of which, of, you know, season 4 of Rebels, you know, you've had Darth Vader, you've got the Emperor, you've got Grand Admiral Thrawn, there's a bunch of stuff going on, which, you know, I like that exposure as the characters move out into the galaxy. And I think you got it in The Mandalorian as well. I'm pretty sure we're going to get it in Andor. Possibly, you know, if we get another episode or another season of the Book of Boba Fett. But yeah, I'm super hyped for Andor. I imagine that if we have this conversation in like 3 or 4 months' time, Andor is going to feature fairly prominently on my very much enjoyed that list. Kenobi was great as well. I loved Kenobi. That was tremendous fun.
Well, good. That we I think we're all really excited for Andor, just because we felt like, you know, the build up for it, 24 episodes over 2 seasons, and then just seeing the trailer, the preview, how cinematic it looks.
Yeah.
It felt Star Warsy, right? It just felt like you were in that universe right there. I also like your point on Rebels, because you know, our group, our podcast group, we obviously we all really enjoy, I think except for Brent, everybody here really enjoys Clone Wars, but Rebels stands out to us because Clone Wars, you had these established characters and established kind of setup to where now we're just fraying off and adding little things to them, giving you some backstory. Rebels was brand new. Had to, yeah, occasionally somebody showed up, but really the story was about this put together family, right?
Yes.
And to make that risk and that jump and say we're going to try this, and for it to end up 4 seasons later being what it ended up being, you know, I think 20 years from now, there are going to be people who are, you know, like, this was my Star Wars, this is my Star Wars, right? And we always talk about different entry points, but I think surprisingly, Rebels is going to be a huge entry point for a lot of people that, like I said, 20 years from now, at conventions, they're going to be saying, look how big the contingency of Rebels fans are from that little 4-season show. So
I mean, it was super cool watching people cosplaying Rebels in Anaheim. I mean, you know, it was my first celebration. Everything was super cool. I mean, with a jet lag, as you know, as soon as I accepted, it was constantly 4 a.m. regardless of what my watch told me. But you know, there were a lot of awesome cosplayers. But yeah, watching people, you know, cosplaying as rebels, that's, you know, it's people
It's
say,
very
oh,
cool.
it's an animated kids show. It's like, well, it's not. None, you know, Clone Wars certainly isn't an animated kids show. It gets
No.
pretty dark in there. And yeah, you know, it moved people, and what's not to love about that?
Yep, exactly. Like Star Wars, in my opinion, it's about the fight of good versus evil, and it's about family. And I think Rebels hit on all those points right there. So, part two, chapter two, how liberty dies. Obviously, we know that Padme says that, or you know, Queen Amidala. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Amidala says that in the movie. Republics, democracy, and fall of civilization. Give us again a big overview of that segment right there.
So this chapter basically focuses on how does Star Wars portray democracies, or you know, or the alternative to a totalitarian state, whether it's like the Old Republic, or you know, the New Republic of the expanded universe, or the New Republic of the sequel trilogy. And the overarching message that is delivered is it doesn't work. Democracies in Star Wars never function. They are always bureaucratic and isolated and corrupt and ripe for, you know, manipulation or takeover by some kind of nefarious Sith Lord or fascist in waiting. Star Wars presents like a weirdly bleak view of actual democracy. And I think the main issue that it flags up is, so when you get if we go to like the prequel trilogy, you know, you've got Anakin and Obi-Wan facing off against each other in Mustafar, and Obi-Wan Kenobi goes, Anakin, my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy, which sounds great. It's, you know, it's a lovely soundbite. There are no elections in the Star Wars universe. What democracy is he talking about?
Yeah.
Senator Amidala got appointed as a senator after she finished being queen by the next queen. So who is actually electing any of these people? And you end up with exactly the same in the expanded universe of the New Republic. You know, an ongoing character of those expanded universe books is Borsk Failure, who, when you pronounce his name like that, is perfectly named.
Oh yeah.
Because but it doesn't matter how many times he screws stuff up, or you know, how many times he, you know, blocks something from happening, which is a, you know, a net good thing. There doesn't appear to be any consequence, because who voted for him? Who's continuing to vote for him? He ends up leading the galaxy at one point.
Right.
Who's making these decisions? There is, you know, the republics are a democracy apparently in name only. There is no participation in them, and as a result, they always collapse.
Well, again, reading this one, some different things pop into my head. So I'll just throw these out there. One, I love the movie Angels and Demons. I love the book first, but the movie's good as well. I actually like the book better, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But one of the key statements that I loved about that movie, and I'm Roman Catholic. I come from the Roman Catholic Church, you know. So for me, watching these movies, they're much more based on an entertainment factor instead of a religious factor. But watching that movie, when the cardinal turned to Robert Langdon and said, "Religion is flawed because man is flawed," and I look at that in government as well. I look at it and say, government is flawed because you have humans, and humans, they're either going to have evil things or they're going to make mistakes or things like that. So I think this chapter right here really stood out to me on that. I also like, you know, and I don't know it word for word, but Ronald Reagan gave a speech while he was running for office, and one of his speeches was, you know, we're only one step away from losing our democracy, our republic, and it's not going to fall from the outside. It's going to fall from the inside, right? And being a person that lives in the United States right now, you look at it and you go, okay, well, you can see some of these things, and it doesn't matter which side of the aisle it's on. You know, we sit there and we go, how come somebody's in office for the next 40 years once they've been elected for office? Why shouldn't someone else given a chance, right?
Yeah.
You mention it. Who keeps electing these people? I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. If somebody's at 40 doing this office, why at 80 are they still doing it? There's got to be somebody else who could have done something better or tried something new in that time frame. But it seems to be a human and Star Wars related thing to where all these things kind of come together, and I'm looking at in real life what they're saying and what you're showing in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I mean, what I find is interesting. I mean, it has to be kind of caveated that some of this, you know, the constant issues with democracy is important for telling a story, because no one's going to, you know, go out and buy a book which is Star Wars going, there's an existential threat. It turns out there's a Sith Lord and he's got a super weapon, but it's all right because the government is functioning perfectly. It's a well-oiled machine. We're going to take care of it before lunch. That's not fun. No one wants to read that. But it's interesting because, you know, your point about democracy being lost from within is exactly George Lucas's point, and he makes it repeatedly about the prequels, that democracies are given away by the people into, you know, isn't overthrown, there isn't a coup or anything like that. People willingly give it away to people that they shouldn't give it to.
And so many times it's to the person that is charismatic and does have that smile that people think, oh, well, look at this nice, look at Palpatine. Look at this nice person that we can all trust. And he's been doing this for so long. He has to know what he's doing, right?
I mean, what a guy. He calls everyone friend. He's always laughing. He loves democracy. What a great guy. Why wouldn't you? I mean, at the beginning of the Revenge of the Sith novel, which is basically a poetry novel within 2 hardback bindings, it talks about how much Palpatine is loved by the people of the galaxy. So you have this kind of fear of it being given away. I mean, you know, as far as George Lucas is concerned, the greatest villain to ever walk the earth is Richard Nixon. And you know, that motivates a lot of his fear. But I find it's super interesting that George Lucas's standpoint is, you know, democracy is precious, it has to be protected, it cannot be allowed to be given away to fascists. But he never actually presents a vision of what a good democracy looks like. It's like, well, you know, at least give us 5 minutes of it looking shiny, George, before you set fire to it.
Let's face it, he grew up in a time in the 60s where, you know, everything was against the man, right? We're against the man. So in the next section, we've got Built on Hope. And honestly, our group, the Rule of the Galaxy crew, we love Rogue One. And to hear Jyn Erso say, you know, they're you know, it's built on hope, right? I mean, and then have Star Wars be the new hope, you know, Luke and so forth. I love this. It's about rebellion, resistance, and the depiction of warfare. So hop into that one. Tell us a little bit about that chapter right there.
I mean, there's an element, you know, this is slightly returning to my First World War roots of like, we're going to have a chapter in here about wars and conflict and battles, and they're like, oh, otherwise I'm just going to have to clock out. So this chapter is effectively partly about, you know, what is the Rebel Alliance? What do we understand about the Rebel Alliance? You know, what are they rebelling against? What is it that they're trying to produce in the place of the Galactic Empire? But it's also about the way that war and conflict has changed in the way that it's been portrayed within Star Wars and the like. And, you know, I said earlier on, you know, we're told that the Empire is bad and therefore it is to be rebelled against, you know, very early in A New Hope. But it's not ever really explained what it is that the rebels are going to put in its place, certainly not in the first film or even in The Empire Strikes Back. It only appears in Return of the Jedi, where they go, actually, getting rid of the Empire or the Emperor is the overarching goal here. You know, once we get rid of him, then we can dismantle the whole system. So I find that as a kind of a starting point super interesting. But what I found really interesting is if you compare like that original trilogy and the expanded universe and the like with what Disney are producing now, is Disney's vision of warfare and conflict. And I think, you know, if you go to the Aftermath books, but particularly Alexander Freed's Alphabet Squadron and Rogue One, it's a bleak, grim, damaging thing to participate in. You know, even if you're on the winning side and you're fighting for a just cause as rebels, simply participating in this warfare is emotionally and physically damaging to you. These people are coming out of it as, you know, scarred, emotionally damaged individuals. And that was never really the case in the expanded universe. I mean, you've got moments in like the X-Wing novels where, you know, someone would die and everyone would be sad, but then, you know, they'd have a party, or Wes Jansen would make a joke and then everyone would be happy again. You know, there was never kind of any long going, you know, shell shock or PTSD elements to the fighters, because, you know, they were fighting the good fight. You know, whatever sacrifice they made was worth it. And the people in Rogue One and Alexander Freed's novels, you know, are also making sacrifices, but they're also questioning whether or not it's worth it. And they're doing some pretty grim stuff. You know, Cassian Andor, the first time we meet him, just guns a guy down in an alleyway because he needs to escape, and this guy's a liability. In the spin-off to the first Battlefront game, which was about Iden Versio, and I've temporarily forgotten what the unit is called. It's not Shadow Squadron, it's something else. But they're talking, you know, they've infiltrated the survivors of Saw Gerrera's resistance fighters, and they're calling themselves the Dreamers. They're using suicide bombs, and they're targeting civilians. You know, it's a very different view of rebellion, and I find that really interesting, the way that has changed over time, and the things that they draw upon. So, you know, the historical examples or the real world examples they draw upon, you know, in the 1990s or now, to go, you know, this is the vision of warfare that we are going to give you. And, you know, there are reasons behind it, but this is what we want you to understand about this particular war at this particular time.
It's absolutely crazy. I mean, it's to think of just looking at warfare and looking at there's always a group that's trying to, like you said, dismantle and take things over. But I think it's perfectly well done or illustrated by politicians, to where politicians do the same thing. I'm going to give you a 30-second commercial, and I'm going to tell you why my opponent is so bad.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, kissing babies, shaking hands. But what are they going to do that's going to be different?
And then what?
Correct. I mean, that when you were talking about that, it just popped right in my head to think that's exactly what I see when it's we're going to make it better. Well, it's great. How are you going to make it better? And oh, by the way, how does that affect all the rest of us? Because these tough decisions that these people are making, that are battling, that fighting that good fight, they've got to make these tough decisions to get us to that next step. That next step better be worth the life and the breath that they put in to that battle, right?
Yeah.
So
when I was finishing this book, you know, there's always stuff going on in the background. But one of the, you know, the things going on in the background when I was finishing writing it was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the fall of Kabul. And, you know, you come back to that, you know, okay, you're going to do a thing. And then what? What is the plan for once you have done this thing? Because if there isn't one, in 20 years' time, we're back to exactly where we started.
We are.
And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing that appear in Star Wars media in the not too distant future, because it's just ripe for a conversation about, I don't know, if they start doing sequel era stuff about the rise of the First Order. If if you did not do X, then given enough time, Y will happen. Well, and I wait and see, I reckon.
I think there's always something to fill that vacuum, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a terrorist group, whether it's a leader of a country that is not looking at other people in a proper way, right? I mean, there's somebody out there who always wants to say, well, what can I grab a hold of, and what can I do? And so it's yeah, I mean, that's really scary to think about. And let's face it, being that I grew up with the first, you know, attacks going on, or the first war in the Middle East, and you're thinking, okay, look, you know, that was when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. And here it was being 30 and 40 years old. Like, wait a minute, I thought we did that already. Wasn't that something that we did? It's just like the First World War and the Second World War. Hey, let's have the war to end all wars. Oh, wait a minute, 20 years later, we're just repeating that again, right? I mean, it's just,
so we're just good to go again. Is that we've all agreed? Okay, fantastic. Because I had plans.
I mean, let's face it, we should, you know, if we follow along in the patterns of what's going on, we should be having another round sometime. I mean, not that I want that to happen, but that's just human nature, and that's what happens. So
yeah, it's never a great time to be a historian.
lots and stuff to write about. Keepers of the peace, not soldiers. Great line from the movie. Jedi, the Force, and the complicated morality of intrastate operatives, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yes. No. I look, like I said, reading, writing, it's not my thing. I just come up here and talk. But I, you know, great thing. I go back to the prequels, and I'll let you obviously talk about this chapter, but the things that go through the minds of the Jedi, especially you see Obi-Wan now in that PTSD afterwards in the Kenobi series. And to think, here was a guy who was like, hey, I'm just here to keep the peace. I'm not here to go lead all these men off to war. I'm not here to battle. I'm here to make things better. What, and then what are the results and what are the after effects of that? So I'll let you run with this one on chapter 4, Keepers of the Peace, Not Soldiers.
So yeah, this one is about the Jedi and the way that they've been portrayed and ways that we can understand their actions and the like through it. And what I find interesting about the Jedi is obviously, again, the rules of Star Wars I was talking about earlier, Empire are the bad guys, Rebel are the good guys, and the Jedi are the super good guys. They use the light side of the Force. They act, for peace and justice in the Old Republic before the Dark Times and all that stuff. The problem with that is the question: are they really? Are the Jedi that great? We get Luke Skywalker's critique of them in The Last Jedi, but what I find interesting about the Jedi is when we go back to the prequel trilogy, and then we get, if we roll in Clone Wars, because in George Lucas's head, it's all there, and he's very much involved in Clone Wars, and we get the corruption and the collapse of the Jedi morality. The war that they become embroiled in, that they become generals, they become soldiers, which is everything they're not supposed to be. And George Lucas describes the Jedi, I think I quote him in the book, as saying that they're supposed to be like peacekeepers. They're warrior monks, but they're not supposed to go out there and fight people. They're supposed to go out there and through politics and negotiation make things good and make things better.
Right.
But all of that exists within the confines of the Republic. They are a branch of the Republic government, and therefore they act through the orders and the interests of the state. And at various points, Obi-Wan says to various people, or Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan says it to Anakin, we can't go beyond our mandate. These are the rules that have been given to us by the Republic. And to an extent that works within the Republic, but it also means that your goodness, your altruism, your virtue stops at the water's edge. And if you cross the road into the street next door, you might not necessarily act in a way that is good and virtuous. And I think if we look at the Phantom Menace, this is before Palpatine's come to power, before we started doing all his manipulations and the like. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon arrive on Tatooine. It's not in the Republic. They discover this slave boy and his mother, and turns out slave boy's super strong in the Force. And Qui-Gon's like, didn't come here to rescue slaves. So doesn't. He buys Anakin, but there's no suggestion that he's like, I'll find a way to do a good thing and bring your mother along, because taking another person out of slavery is a good thing. It's just, you're not in the Republic, so guess my hands are tied. That's a very peculiar moral starting point, Qui-Gon.
I think we see that that's one of the things that some of our group talks about, is just like that part right there. And then The Last Jedi, when Rose is so worried about letting those creatures go, but the kids that are down there that are getting whipped by the guy, we're good. We let the creatures go, so just they're fine, But you're right. Qui-Gon did the same thing. Hey, that's out of my hands, man. I'm not here for that. I got other things to do. I love the idea of the warrior monks. Again, coming from a Catholic background, you look and you say, okay, how much in past history were priests and monks and people like that out there to help with society, right? They were out there to do good things and bring people together. Now you throw lightsabers in their hands, right? I mean, okay, so now we're going to another level here. But yeah, it's such a tough thing. And let's face it, I think, was it the Bane novels, the Darth Bane novels, where they were originally on their own, and then because they went into a battle that the at that time Chancellor Valorum, like Valorum's great grandfather or whatever, or some future distant, he put in rules. Hey, no, you got to follow. We do. You're part of the Republic now.
Yes.
And so then they got their hands tied a little bit more. But before that, they were just like superheroes. And you watch in the Marvel universe, think about that with the Winter Soldier and how the Avengers were fighting each other, right? Because oh, now the nations are saying, hey, you can go save everybody, but don't destroy that building. Or you can go save
Yeah.
everybody, but oh, that person accidentally died while you were saving those 100 over there.
Yes.
The Jedi kind of got caught up in that same
Yeah, they
mix
did.
right there.
And what's then becomes super interesting, again through the kind of the 1990s expanded universe period, is that you get real world things happening. Like, so if we consider that the Jedi are United Nations peacekeepers, effectively, outside of their mandate, they can't do diddly. But if they're given something to do, they can go away and do it. But during the 1990s, we get the Rwandan genocide, we get the massacre at Srebrenica, both of which the United Nations do not come out of at all well, particularly not at Srebrenica, where they basically stood and watched, because getting involved would have been outside their mandate and they misunderstood various things that was going on. But then in the expanded universe, you get things like the Yavitha genocide, and you get things like the New Rebellion with Dolph, where you get in-world genocides, and people within it point at the Republic, and particularly the Jedi, and go, where were you? When we needed you to come and save us, to protect us, you were all stood on the sideways going, getting involved in a war is a messy business. I don't necessarily know if we want to do it. We've got polling data to think about. We're enjoying being at peace, so maybe we shouldn't get involved. And you can't read those books without going, there is a critique of the real world right now going on in here, and it's very pointed and it's very well done.
You bring up some good points. The Martez sisters in the Clone Wars, bringing up how their parents died because of some actions some Jedi were doing. Now, the Jedi obviously did not kill their parents, but in the actions of trying to stop something else, they were taken out. So to them, the Jedi are looked at as not people they want to be around or trust or anything else.
Where were you when we needed you?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, there's things to be looked at on that all the way around. You're 100% right. Before we get into the last two real quick here, we asked this question of everybody who comes on as a guest. We started this because we were joking, saying that Count Dooku's hilt on his lightsaber was odd, and how he did his fencing with his pinky out and one-handed. We joked about who would want to buy Captain Dooku's or Count Dooku's lightsaber at Disney, for example.
Yeah.
And then we started going, well, wait a minute. Now that we've read these books about Count Dooku, now that we've seen we heard this audio book about Count Dooku, we've gone deeper into his backstory. There's kind of some really cool things about this character. But with that, we ask everybody, who has your favorite hilt when it comes to a Star Wars lightsaber hilt?
So, I mean, firstly, I would buy Count Dooku's lightsaber at Disney. You might remember back in, like, again, it was about the time that the prequels were coming out. Master Replicas had the license to do Star Wars lightsabers, and I got Darth Vader's, I got Darth Maul's, and the answer to your question, whose lightsaber hilt would I most like? I like the Emperor's. I think it's a really interesting design. I think that the fact that there isn't an on button on it. And it's triggered through use of the Force to therefore have an element of plausible deniability.
Wow.
But I think because he has multiple lightsabers which have different designs. He's got the gold one that he uses to carve everybody up in his office in Revenge of the Sith. But then when he fights Yoda at the end of that film, it's black. The metal on it has turned black, so it's a different aspect of his personality. And the ostentatious kind of, I like gold shiny things because I like power, but also I like dressing in black because I'm a Sith Lord, and that's our color chart. But what I find interesting, and I don't think this made it into the book. There were all sorts of things that didn't make it into the book. But historically speaking, I think the fact that Palpatine's first lightsaber that we see is gold plated at the same time that we see the likes of Saddam Hussein and his sons having gold plated AK-47s is probably not a coincidence.
Wow. Interesting. I'm going to leave that one as it is right there. I think that's good enough. You hit that one right on the head. Chapter 5, we don't want them here. And that's from the bartender at the cantina, correct?
Yeah, it is.
When the droids come in. Yeah, so this one, aliens, androids, and far outsiders. I'd love to hear your description of this chapter right here.
So this chapter is one that's slightly kind of set apart from what comes before. Agreed. It. So this, it deals with the portrayal of aliens, and it deals with the portrayal of droids, and the representation of different species, but also different human races and the like.
Yeah.
But this chapter is the end of basically the logical conclusion of what begins the book, which is, the starting argument of the book is Star Wars uses real world history. And here are a bunch of examples about how it does that. But if you start down that road, forever will it dominate your destiny. But also, you have to accept that the real world uses Star Wars. The two have to exist and coexist together. So this chapter is also about how does the real world react to particular things in Star Wars, be it about representation of race or sexuality or gender or concepts of alienness or concepts of humanity and the like. So this chapter is not just about how does Star Wars use aliens to comment about different racial issues in humanity. It's also about how do the fans react to different types of representation. And as Star Wars has evolved, particularly now in the Disney period, into trying to include different races, different genders, different sexualities, different visions of human and humanity. How does that play out? And I don't think it will be a shock to anybody listening. I'm kind of imagine it will be a shock to you to know there is an element of culture wars that envelops Star Wars when you start talking about it on the internet, and some people have very strong views about certain aspects of it. And this chapter is a kind of about how do the various stakeholders of Star Wars interact with Star Wars when they see it on the screen, when Star Wars is trying to do new things. And it was important to me to do this chapter, partly because, as you said right at the beginning, people have to understand, they go and watch a Star Wars film. It's not necessarily the director going, here's what I think, you should think this too. It's, here's what I think, do with it what you want to. It's a product of their experience. But there's an element of it that, and it's this kind of, don't put politics in Star Wars. Well, the book is basically saying there has always been politics in Star Wars, but it's also saying, and it's fine. Everything has politics in it. Nothing is created by some human being who lives in a vacuum bubble, who's never interacted with the outside world, because it would be really, that's going to be a super weird experience for everybody involved. And I'm a historian. And it's important for me to recognize that I am not existing in a vacuum. I have my own ideas and my own beliefs and my own theories about stuff. I'm as much impacted by cultural pressures as you are, as the listeners are, as a director making a Star Wars book in America, as a writer making a Star Wars book in the UK. And therefore, I can take an element of a stance about it in my analysis and go, this is what I think is happening. Here's the stuff that I think is understandable. Here's the stuff I'm not quite so keen on. But also, this is where I think this process is going. Here's what I think are some of the stakes involved in, a battle for the soul of Star Wars that gets sometimes played out on the internet. And I think it's important to look at, and I think it's important to talk about. I
would agree with you. And I might say some things here that maybe some of our listeners will like, maybe some of them won't like. I will say this. I am a person, just in this simple short time, my background, where I'm from. I'm a married man, live in the United States. I come from a Roman Catholic background. I look at the world through my tinted glasses. This is the way I've been raised, right? And your background and your upbringing is how you are brought up and raised. I would never knock someone for who they are, where they came from, all those kind of things. I don't think that's the right thing to do at all. I think we should have our own opinions. We should have our own views. I think one of the things that I look at when it comes to this chapter and this segment of it is, for example, I think, the people at Disney that I'm seeing right now that are leading this, a lot of times it does feel like there's one path of the way they want to, they're like, hey, we really are feeling strongly about this, so we're going to make sure we keep pushing this narrative. That's fine. But for being the kind of people who say we're all inclusive, we want to bring everything together, I don't think it's wrong to have a person who says, well, I kind of look at things in a different way. Can we still make a character over here that looks at things maybe a different way? Because believe it or not, we just went through huge elections in the US. We saw how split the country was 50-50, right? I mean, it's
I think I saw some of that on the news.
Yeah, lots of split things, right? So, but there's a lot of times where I feel like Disney in general has said, well, we're going to stick with this 50% over here, and we're going to make sure that every bit of our stories feeds into that 50%, while the other 50% is going, I love Star Wars. Can you just keep making Star Wars, have that 50%, but keep making my Star Wars too, right? I mean,
yeah, it can be a
so
broad church.
exact. But I just
mean,
thought
none of us work for Disney, so
well, there's a good chance you could with these great books you're writing here. I mean, come on, you've got
I mean,
2 books that are Star Wars related. That's awesome.
I wouldn't, if Disney decide that they, desperately want to hire me, they've got my number. But it's a weird one because, lots of people have been asking, particularly after I did Battles That Changed the Galaxy, like an official thing, are you going to do more? I said, well, it's not really my decision to make. I would like to do more. DK, no, I would like to do more. Hopefully in the future, something will happen. But what I've kind of been thinking about since finishing this book and it's coming out, everybody like being super excited about it, is that at some point, and to be honest, it's probably happening, this might be it, is that I can do analysis of Star Wars as history books like this, and I can do official stuff. I don't know if I can do them both. I just don't know if those two things can coexist, because say something amazing happens, I get to write like 5 new official Star Wars books, and it's I have a whale of a time and it's great fun. And then in 5 years time I release The History and Politics of Star Wars 2, more Death Stars and less democracy, and I stand there and go, there's even more history in Star Wars than we believed, everybody. People are going to go, well, you're citing the books that you wrote. That's not analysis, Chris. That's talking about stuff that you did. That doesn't count. And at the same time, like, I'm then going to have a conversation with Lucasfilm and they're going to go, that doesn't count. You can't do that. So at some point I'm going to have to, I'm probably, in the hope that I get to do more official stuff, I'm going to have to pick of the two.
Understood.
And it's probably going to be the official stuff.
Yeah.
Because why wouldn't you?
Well, we have a good friend of the show, Adam Bray. He goes as author Adam Bray on Twitter. I don't know if you've interacted with him.
I might have done.
But he's done some DK books. He's done some Star Wars encyclopedias, some Marvel encyclopedias, Rebels encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Good guy. But again, another person that you should connect with, because you guys have a lot of, you guys are very detail oriented. You like to dig into the nitty gritty of it. So yeah, I think that would be good. Last but not least, your conclusion. Always in motion, the future is.
So this is tricky because I don't know if you've noticed, Disney are releasing a lot of Star Wars stuff.
A lot.
Yeah, which is, a good time to be a fan, really bad time if you're trying to wrap up a book, of trying to figure out when the full stop goes. So this is effectively me trying to predict the future of what I think might happen in, the obvious argument is Star Wars is not going to stop making Star Wars, and therefore Star Wars is not going to stop making references to the real world and historical stuff. It's just going to carry on. It's just, it is inevitable. It is fact. And therefore looking at, okay, what has happened just, in the period of writing this book, of stuff that might get drawn upon in future stuff. So, as I mentioned earlier, the fall of Kabul, the effective failure of the war in Afghanistan. I would be very surprised if some element of that doesn't come up in Star Wars in the future. Stuff going on in American politics is always ripe for inclusion in pop culture, and I would be very surprised if elements of recent events over there do not appear in Star Wars.
Easy to write some similarities in there. Yes.
Yeah. But also then you get stuff like the High Republic, which is cool and which is interesting. And I read the first 3 major books for it and then had to go, you know what, the further into this I go, the harder this is going to be to stop. So, I read like Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm and The Fallen Star, and super enjoyed all of them. And it's cool. It's brand new, open sandbox Star Wars where anything could happen, and I'm here for it.
Clean palette. I like that. Yes.
Yeah. But it's also interesting to me the extent to which it is continuing stuff that has already existed. So if we look at, the events of Light of the Jedi and The Rising Storm and The Fallen Star, and, you get large-scale terrorist attacks that are beamed across the galaxy, and everybody watches them and everybody experiences them, and it completely dramatically changes the way they interact with the government and fears of stuff going on in like the Outer Rim and the like. And how is this not war on terror stuff? How is this not 9/11 re-examined and repurposed within this very particular time period? And I find that fascinating. I find that super interesting, the extent to which, you know, elements of, you know, stuff that Star Wars has been mining for decades now can be re-examined and repurposed and reframed for this brand new stuff. So the that concluding chapter is basically me going, stuff that's happening now is going to get included, you know, Afghanistan, American politics, and like stuff that Star Wars has always been using, Vietnam, you know, just look at Clone Wars and stuff like that. And, you know, I would imagine we'll get some Vietnam stuff in Andor, for example, just because.
Yeah, most definitely. Where it fits into the story.
Yeah. And, but also war on terror stuff, which is, you know, a big part of the prequel trilogy, will continue to appear in elements of, I imagine, the High Republic, and who knows what else will happen. But the grand argument at the end of it is it will be historical, it will be political, because it has always been so. It is just fact.
100%. And look, you know, I brought up some points that are in my head earlier, but I can tell you this: I love Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars to me, I message you back and forth on it. Our group, we want to have fun with it. We want to escape the real world to talk about this fake world, right? We've done it 158 times now where we've escaped and done this. But it is good every now and then to do this course correction and go, hey, let's talk about some of the meat and grindiness of it, right? And I think it's good. I think it's good for you to have a book that does this. But just because maybe, again, you mentioned it, not every person's going to say this part of Star Wars hits me just right. That's okay. Because there are people out there that Star Wars Legos is their Star Wars. Star Wars video games are their Star Wars. The books only are their Star Wars. There's a lot
of Star Wars to go around for everyone.
There is. And you don't have to go, wow, it all hits me the same way. My group always talks about video games. You know how many Star Wars video games I've played?
Big fat zero.
Never played a Star Wars game in my life. I just don't do well with that. So I take it in. Sometimes I'll sit and watch them play, right? Because I'm like, oh, it's like watching a movie. But, you know, I think you bring up some good points that it doesn't have to hit you the same way. You don't have to like everything the same. But there are some things that touch base with the real world in this that we should really look back and go, how does that hit me, right? How does that way that director or that writer or whatever thought about it, how does that hit me in the way I look at Star Wars? So I think you've done a great job of it. I'm going to finish up the book probably this weekend, the last few chapters there. But I've really enjoyed it, and I've really enjoyed you coming and talking, and hopefully I haven't butchered this conversation all to heck.
No, not at all. I've really enjoyed it. And the fact that, you know, you invited me on, you wanted to read the book, it's, you know, that's basically everything an author has ever wanted to hear. You know, someone go, you wrote a thing, I am interested in it, I would like to read it and talk to you about it, is, that, you know, I was saying to you before we started, it's not the norm for academic books. I've never had this happen before. You know, there was an element of, I'm writing a book about Star Wars and history, I reckon this will land. But there's no way of knowing. And, you know, I could have sent it out into the world and everybody come back and gone, this is just garbage, Chris. You're just talking about Star Wars and stuff I don't care about. And you, not only do I not like it, you've ruined Star Wars and history for me. And then I've got to live with that. You know, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself.
Well, I will tell you what, I'm going to make my daughter read it. The one with the history degree. I would definitely want to get her feedback on it. So, but again, thank you for being on. Like I said, I wanted to keep you for like an hour or so with your time and my time, so I can get back to doing what I need to be doing. But it's been a great pleasure. Again, best ways for people to track you, we'll put all that in the notes and tag everything for everybody. Any closing thoughts from you before we tie things up here in a nice little bow?
I mean, what I will say is when we finish up here, I've got a discount code for 20% off. If any of your listeners want to use that on the Routledge website, I will send you the code for that. You can include that in the show notes.
Yes.
I think, kind of wrapping up stuff, what we've been saying, there's a lot of Star Wars to go around. It's fine that not everybody likes everything. It's all right. There's parts of Star Wars and Star Wars books that just, they're not for me. And it's fine because I know people who absolutely love them. What I would say about this kind of this historical and political angle for it is almost look at it as if you were reading a book with footnotes. You can read the text and just take that and be like, I'm just going to have I'm going to take it face value, and this is what I'm experiencing. But if you want to know like the behind the scenes bit about a little bit about, how did this how was this put together? What is, is there a deeper meaning behind some of it? Is there something else I'm supposed to be getting from it? Look at the footnotes. And that's what I want, hopefully, this book to be. It's something that enhances Star Wars for people. It doesn't ruin it for them.
It definitely, I think you did your research, because I was reading through, I was like, my goodness, there's a lot of notes on here. I was like, Mike, there, it's going to this article, it's going to this book. I was blown away. So it's much more, while I read novels or I read books for joy and pleasure, this was definitely much more, like you said, it's definitely more an academic book that was bringing a lot of information that maybe a lot of people didn't know. So again, thank you, Chris. Thanks. 2, I hope we do get to cross paths in the future. 3, I'm going to make sure, whether it's Mark Newbold or Adam Bray, guys who I think would fit very well with you, and you'd have some great conversations with. I'm going to make sure I reach out to them and make sure you guys are all connected, because I think you're a good guy and you've done some really good things here. So thank you from the Rule of the Galaxy crew. Sorry that everybody couldn't be here and it's just me. It would have been better probably
This has been cool.
for the rest of them. But let's keep in touch, and let's, I'll be ready for your next big announcement, the next big thing you're going to be doing. So
yeah, I mean, I have no idea what that. I'm gonna take a rest for a while, I think, before I suddenly have to start thinking, oh god, I've got to write another book. So yeah, who knows? But hopefully it'll involve Star Wars in the future, and that'll make me happy.
You got it. Well, this book should make a lot of people happy. From the Rule of the Galaxy crew, from Chris Kempshall, to all of our listeners and followers, thank you so much. And until next week, may the Force be with you.